Welcome back, everybody, to the official FF Metrics podcast. I'm going to be your host today, AndrewDFS. Joined alongside me is the owner and founder of Fantasy Football Metrics, RC Fischer. And today we got a jam-packed episode where we're going to talk through the whole NFC's draft, give our thoughts, our reactions, best picks, worst picks, sleepers. RC, before we dive in, do you want to give the audience a quick update on what's going on with your website?
And just one thing about the show tonight, we're going to be looking at each team's draft, but we're really looking at it not only to put a little analysis out there, but mainly to get an idea of whether this draft on top of free agency moves a needle for betting on these teams, betting on the over-under win totals. So our primary focus is to kind of walk through these drafts and go, did they get a mass improvement or did they butcher it? What has happened here? So just wanted to put that out there. And I've been working on Dynasty Rookie Draft Top 300 rankings, which are now fully engaged up to 300. They'll be updating every week. Working on updating the Dynasty Top 600 offensive players, Top 500 IDP players. That will be out quickly as well. I've been living in Draftland trying to update the projections and see what the impact of all of these rookies, where they landed, are. But I haven't looked lately at the entire team's, at a particular team's entire draft. From top to bottom, including the undrafted free agents, which I think is so important and way often overlooked in all of this. So I'm kind of coming into this with fresh eyes from a betting perspective, knowing we were going to do this show. So you're going to tee up the team, and then I'm going to look at the current depth chart and the rookies and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, and for the audience's sake, I'll read out the top 100 picks, and then RC is going to look through the depth chart, get his high-level thoughts on all the players there, how they fit in, and maybe even some of the undrafted free agents they signed. And again, for each team, we're going to answer whether or not we like the draft, the best pick, the worst pick, and a potential sleeper. So let's start with the bottom up. We'll go division by division. NFC West, the team that finished last there was the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm going to have to do a lot of talking on this one because the Cardinals had so many top 100 picks. I think they had the most in the draft. So they took Marvin Harrison and Darius Robinson in the first round. In the second round, they took Max Melton, who Nick Saban claimed was one of the biggest steals at defensive back. Let's see if RC agrees with that. Then in the third round, they had 4 picks. They took Trey Benson, running back from Florida State, Isaiah Adams, a guard out of Illinois, Tip Ryman, a tight end from Illinois, and Elijah Jones, a defensive back from Boston College. RC, what's your high-level thought? Do you like the draft? Do you not like the draft? Or this doesn't move the needle for you?
When we were doing the live stream about Arizona, or about the NFL draft in total as it was unfolding, one of the running themes, one of the running jokes of our live stream was me flipping out on how good the Arizona draft was going through the first 2 rounds, because I've been a Rams bettor and I don't need San Francisco, Arizona, or Seattle getting any better to hurt my division win bet or anything like that. So I'm not a Rams fan. I'm not a fan of any particular team. I'm a fan of the team I've bet the most money on. So I've got a lot riding on the Rams this year for wins and division title and going to the Super. So I was very interested to see what the rest of the division would do. I was hating the Arizona draft because it was so good. And as I look at it now, it's a contender. I'm going to be doing a piece in a couple days, taking the contenders for who look like they had the best draft and kind of breaking it down and seeing who really did have statistically had the best draft. But Arizona's one of those contenders for best draft I mean, they added starters. There's probably not right off the bat, but within this season, and for sure starting next season, there is one, two, three, four, five, six. There is seven legit starters that they got in this draft, and that's monstrous. And they got some. I don't know that they got an elite player. There wasn't really, to me, there was only two or three elite players in this draft, and Marvin Harrison was definitely not one of them. But Marvin Harrison is good. I really like Darius Robinson more, and I like Max Melton. They have set the foundation for the future, but it's probably going to take a year. But I like what they did. I have a hard time betting them because the numbers. This is still a tough division for them. They still may be a year away. That the odds are juiced to don't bet the they're trying to keep you away from betting the over with the odds. So I like what they did, but this is probably going to be a story of they're good this year. They're battling for 500. They're battling for a playoff spot. But next year is the year, if Kyler Murray is still okay, next year is the year for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of holes on their roster, so it's good that they got to fill up a bunch of different positions. Maybe none of them are going to be all pro generational players. And we all know your stance with Marvin Harrison, but he can certainly walk in there and become a solid contributor to the team. RC, what was your most favorite pick and least favorite pick from this draft?
The best player they probably got out of this draft is, I'm going to say the guy that probably has the most impact is Trey Benson. I think he'll be a lead running back. He's the strongest lead running back talent from the draft. Darius Robinson could be the best pick that they made, a defensive end, defensive tackle, 3-4 defensive end. He was key. They got some really nice corners, but Trey Benson he'll probably be the one we remember for statistical output. The worst pick that they made for me is Marvin Harrison, just because of the level of pick that it was at number 4. They could have got a million different things. I wouldn't have taken a wide receiver at 4, but if I did, it would have probably been Malik Neighbors. But if I had more background research, and if Malik Neighbors scared me of being a knucklehead, then I just wouldn't. It's with all the wide receiver talent that was out there, and with all the picks Arizona had, I would have never taken a wide receiver at 4 unless Neighbors really checked out across the board. And I would have just waited and used one of my other picks to get Ladd McConkey, get some second round wide receiver talent in this. So everybody thinks I'm bashing on Marvin Harrison, which I am, because he's been held up to be the messiah of football. So you say anything negative and you're deemed crazy. I just don't. Even if he ends up being good, that's going to end up being a bad pick that they're going to regret for the other guys that were available. Wouldn't matter if it was Arizona or anybody else taking them. You can't take a wide receiver, to me, at number 4 with some of the talent that was out there, especially on the offensive line.
So there was a deep wide receiver class this year, right? And when you take a wide receiver at 4, you're expecting them to be Julio Jones, someone at AJ Green's level, Jamar Chase. And what you're basically saying, RC, is not that Marvin Harrison's going to be bad per se, just for the audience. You're just saying he's not generational. And at 4, you need him to be generational, especially when the wide receiver draft class is that deep.
Yeah, when there's 5-6 guys that could lay claim to being the best wide receiver in this draft, it just waters down what Marvin Harrison is really worth. If we were talking last year, maybe Marvin Harrison is the top wide receiver in the draft, and I still don't think you take that number. I don't think what I've seen of Marvin Harrison several times, double checking, triple checking, because it's so blasphemous to be against him. I just don't see a superstar wide receiver. I see a competent, good wide receiver with some risk that he's going to be more average than he is great. I know he's going to get great targets. I know he's going to get great treatment, like a Jerry Jeudy when he came out in the draft, and other first round guys will get a bunch of hype and a bunch of excuses. I just don't think in the end he's going to live up to being worth the number 4 pick.
Okay, RC, before we move on to the Seattle Seahawks, give me and the Seattle fans a sleeper, sorry, and the Arizona fans a sleeper in this draft. Who do you think could come out of nowhere?
The one that surprised me, the one they have 2 interesting picks that they made that I was impressed with. One is the tight end Tip Ryman out of is he Washington?
Yeah. He was Illinois.
Or Illinois, that's right. He's a all around classic NFL tight end that Trey McBride is really not. So I don't know that Tip Ryman is going to be able to have the full impact, but he's going to have an impact. But I think Elijah Jones, the corner at a BC, could be a starter pretty quickly and be a kind of a shocking instant success at corner.
Interesting. Okay. Well, RC, let's go up to the 3rd place team in the NFC West, the Seattle Seahawks. And I told you the Arizona Cardinals had the most amount of picks in the top 100, but the Seattle Seahawks only had 2. So a lot less talking for me here. With their 1st round pick, they took Byron Murphy from Texas. And in the 3rd round, they did not have a 2nd round pick. I think that might have been used in the Leonard Williams trades with the Giants, but I could be off with that. But in the 3rd round, they took Christian Haynes, guard out of Connecticut. RC, only 2 top 100 picks, but overall, did you like this draft? Did you not like it? Or are we somewhere in the middle?
It was more of a shoulder shrug, lean, kind of I like Christian Haynes. He could be an instant starter for them. I do not get Byron Murphy at all, and that could slap me in the face when I see him play in the pros. If he's more motivated, I know he checks all the boxes athletically, but when I watch him on tape, I just saw too many centers and guards just from better schools just manhandle him and him have a low impact. So Byron Murphy's somebody you'd like to have on the team, but I'm not using a 1st round draft pick on it. So if Murphy goes on to just be nothing, then this draft is going to be Christian Haynes is a good offensive line prospect. Their middle linebacker Tyrese Knight is pretty good, but no other real wow players that they got. So I don't think Seattle got any better. Seattle probably, with Arizona having the draft that they did and Seattle really not getting any better, I'd say that Seattle is cruising towards heading to last place and getting blown up this maybe mid-season or definitely next season.
And for those of you that didn't follow the draft as closely as maybe someone like RC or myself did, Byron Murphy was actually being talked about and being taken much higher than the 16th overall pick. Like there were even talks he might go in the top 10. So Seattle was able to grab him at 16. But what didn't make sense to me about that pick is, first of all, he's sort of an undersized D lineman to begin with. And second, they already traded for Leonard Williams. It felt like their line was okay. So it's kind of like, I don't know how Byron Murphy really fits in there. But like RC said, if he translates well in the NFL, then it could end up being a good pick. So we'll see what happens. But RC, what was your most and least favorite player that the Seattle Seahawks picked in this draft?
Probably the best player, the most obvious player to me is going to be the guard Christian Haynes. That's the right position that you want to get talent at, and they were able to pull off a pretty decent prospect for the 3rd round. My least favorite pick, of course, is Byron Murphy. I think that's they could look back at that and think why did we do this? We did not need to waste that pick on that. And then my favorite sleeper of this group, Tyrese Knight, um, is arguably the best middle linebacker in this draft, pure middle linebacker. Um, so I like that pick. And then they got an undrafted free agent, Carlton Johnson, who was a late invitee to the Senior Bowl. Smaller corner, but lightning quick. I think he's at it's not Fresno State. Let me check. It is Fresno State. 5'11", 173. So he's kind of thin, but he was a fighter at the Senior Bowl, and he was one of the fastest players at the Senior Bowl. So
yeah, and so Tyrese Knight was their 4th-round pick. They got him at I think the pick was 118 overall out of Texas, El Paso, and then Carlton Johnson, like RC was saying, undrafted free agent from Fresno State. RC, before we move on to the next team, I wanted to ask you, if you were the GM of the Seahawks, you said you didn't love the Byron Murphy pick, and you gave us an insight to what you would have done if you were Arizona's GM, what would you have done if you were sitting as the Seattle GM at pick 16?
You're sitting at 16. You're right in the range of, to me, the two best players arguably in the draft. Latu, the pass rusher for UCLA, and Fuaga, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State. I would have done whatever I needed to do to get to them, or if they fell to me, I'm taking one or the other.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Seattle, that didn't end up being the case. Fuaga went 14th overall to the Saints, Latu the next pick to the Colts at 15, but maybe a little trade up there would have sealed the deal, and they could have had a much better prospect. So
if I thought I was going to get in on them, and then they went 14 and 15 after I cursed my personal god and threw stuff around the war room in complete disgust, I would have then been working to trade that pick and trade back and get more picks, because I would have wanted out of the draft, out of the first round by that point.
Okay. Well, RC, let's move on to your one of your favorite teams in the NFL. You have no favorites, but you have a betting interest in this team for the at least the next.
Which makes them my current favorite right now. Based on the amount of money that's on the line, they are my favorite team right now.
The Los Angeles Rams. They finished second place last year, and they were a sleeper even in last year's playoffs too. They could have went far. They had 4 top 100 picks, and they finally had a first-round pick since their Jared Goff pick in 2016. So this is their first rounder in a really long time. And with that pick, RC, 19th overall, they went with Jared Verse, defensive end from Florida State. Then in the second round, they went with Verse's teammate, Braden Fisk, D tackle out of Florida State. So now they have that Florida State D line. You know, they have the 2 pieces of that D line coming in to try to fill the hole that Aaron Donald left behind. I don't think that's a crate. That's not even a hole, man. That's like a massive crater or something. But anyways, in the third round, they had 2 picks. They went with Blake Corum, the running back from Michigan, which a lot of people know about just because he was in the national championship game. Obviously, they had a deep playoff run in the college football playoffs. So a lot of people are familiar with him. And finally, with the 99th overall pick, they went Cameron Kitchens, defensive back from Miami. So RC, do you like, not like, or don't really care about this draft?
I'm more on the like side. I wanted it to be better just because of the personal betting bias, but it was still good, potentially very good, but it is very deep. If Fisk and Verse are as good as we think, they're going to make a difference, but they're not going to change football. And I don't know that we'll be talking about those guys as Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers, but they fit, they work, they fit, they're going to contribute and play. So it gives them more depth, talent, and rotation on the defensive line. It doesn't make up for missing Aaron Donald, but it helps. They got some decent depth on the offensive line. They're undrafted free agents. They had a couple interesting pickups. They just did a good job of picking up fringe starters, contributors, possible guys who end up being good starters. So overall, I would grade it a good draft, but it was not the home run draft I was looking for. And that may just be my own personal. I may set too lofty of an expectation that I'm willing it and wanting it to be a draft like some of the teams we'll talk about in a bit had drafts that just blew me away. The Rams draft didn't blow me away, but it was good.
Yeah, this is the second year in a row, RC, where they spent two top 100 picks on a D end and D tackle. Last year was Byron Young and Kobe Turner. This year, Verse and Fisk. Tell me who you think was the best pick and the worst pick that the Rams made this year.
I'd say Fisk is probably the best pick. Um, if he ends up being more Pro Bowlish and a star, I wouldn't be shocked. I would pick him as the top pick over a Verse, who I think is going to be fine, but Byron Young that they drafted last year is better, or maybe even equal to, and nobody hardly remembers that they took Byron Young or who the heck he is. So they got another Byron Young at best, which is great, but it's not. I'm not big into pass rusher specialists, so Fisk can do damage on the interior with his size and speed. So that's my favorite pick. My least favorite pick is a lot of people are into Cameron Kitchens, and them taking Cameron Kitchens makes me pause a little bit and give some respect because the Rams are pretty smart with their draft picks. So I'm willing to take another look at Cameron Kitchens, but every time I've looked so far this draft season, I just don't see it. So for the third round to reach for a questionable safety, I don't think that was a very wise spend of a third round pick.
And if I'm a Rams fan, RC, tell me somebody that I can get excited about that's maybe lesser known. Who's the sleeper in this one that can come out of nowhere and shock me?
The best sleeper pick, maybe the best, arguably the best pick that they made was the kicker in the 6th round, Josh Carty out of Stanford. I think going into this, I thought he was by far the best kicker prospect that I had seen pre-draft, and kicker was a sore spot for them last year. They went from Maher to, or they went from Tanner Brown to Maher to, I forget who they ended up winding up with by the end of the season, or maybe it was Maher to Brown. So
Didn't they have Crosby too at one point, or am I losing my mind?
I think they tried to sign Crosby. They may have even brought back Maher. It's cloudy to me. I just know it was a problem. Every kicker that they turned to had a moment, and then the moment was gone. So if Carty comes in and is like what Moody was for the 49ers, and from what I've seen, I think Carty's better than Jake Moody. That's a big deal, because one of the things that aggravates me about the betting on the Rams was their kickers stink, and that could cost them a win or two in season. But now they go out and, to me, get the best kicker that was out there. So I'm well pleased about it. Also, Brennan Jackson, in the 5th round, could end up being as good as the frontline guys that were taken in the first couple rounds.
Yeah, interesting that kicker would be your sleeper. But yeah, you have a really good point. If they shore that up and Carty is as good as you think he will be, that's definitely going to be a big boost to them. That's going to provide an immediate impact next year. RC, is it safe to say that if you were sitting there in the 49ers spot and in the Rams spot and you couldn't trade up, would you trade out of the draft, or was there somebody else at 19 that you would have considered?
Again, I would have been, if I was that close to getting in on Latu or Fuaga, I would have tried to find a way to get to it. So them getting Jared Verse, that's maybe about as good as you could do in the second half of the first round. But I may have traded back to try to get more picks, but they had a pretty good amount of picks. They signed a lot of undrafted free agents. So I don't know if accumulating more picks was what they really needed to do. They needed to just hit on the top ones that they got, and for the most part, they didn't take any at one and first and second round where I go, what the heck were they thinking? Third round with Kitchens, little shaky, but the rest of it was fine. They get some good undrafted free agents, filled the kicker hole, and they've had a great off season in free agency. So they don't really they didn't need to load up and have the greatest day 3 of the draft because they had such a good free agency period. And we didn't even talk about Blake Corum. He's fine. I would have took other running backs before I took Blake Corum, but Blake Corum's fine.
Yeah. So, okay, let's move on to the next team, RC 49ers, who finished first in their division. They had 3 top 100 picks. First round, they took Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver from Florida. Our very own Ross Jacobs was very excited about that pick. He hit that right in the head. He called him being a day one guy, and I think he even mocked him exactly to the 49ers. I think he was one of the only people to do that, so props to him. In the second round, they took Renardo Green, defensive back from Florida State. And in the third round, 86th overall, they took Dominique Puny, guard from Kansas. RC, how do you feel about the 49ers draft overall?
I like it because it was probably the worst of the drafts in this division. And being a temporary Rams fan, I need the 49ers to not get better. I need them to decline. And this is the kind of draft that definitely did not push them ahead, push them, keep staying with distance above the Rams. So, I mean, and I like Ricky Pearsall a lot. But I assume he's going to start and that Brandon Ayuk is going to be out of there, possibly Debo. So it's one wide receiver out, one wide receiver in. So that's not going to be a huge impact. They are starting to have problems on the offensive line, and then they end up drafting one offensive lineman in the top 300 or top 100. If I were them, I would have drafted. Pearsall's fine to take in the first round, but then I would have took 2 offensive linemen, taken Renardo Green that with a million other corners just as exciting as him out there. I mean, even if Green is fine, there was plenty of other options out there. And I like the guard out of Kansas, but with the offensive line starting to become a problem, I would have thought they would have thrown more firepower at that, but they didn't. They didn't even. The next offensive lineman they drafted was in the 6th round, so I don't see the 49ers getting better. And just from a quick reaction, it looks like they had the worst draft to me in the division.
Yeah, instead of Renardo Green, RC, the next pick right after was Kingsley Suamataia from BYU, who Kansas City took.
Kansas City got, yeah.
Yeah, so they could have had him over Green, and that would have been a nice eventual replacement maybe for Trent Williams. But let's move on. What do you think was their best pick, their worst pick, and a potential sleeper that the 49ers fans can get excited about?
Best pick's going to have to be Pearsall because I don't really see anybody else on the list where I was blown away by what they took. I was just thinking, man, if they would have took Pearsall and then just took offensive linemen at 2, 3, and 4, hoping that at least one of them worked out. Instead, they do take one offensive lineman, but Renardo Green and then Mustafa, the safety, there was no need for them to take those guys. to me, you almost can't draft a safety anymore unless they're the most special thing you've ever seen. So a generic safety in the fourth round is terrible. So that will be my worst pick, is them taking Mustafa in the fourth. Pearsall, just by his talent, is the best pick. And then the sleeper of the group it is somebody that they didn't need, but is nice to have, Isaac Guerendo, the running back out of Louisville. I'm highly interested in, and that may end up coming on to help them even this year, like if McCaffrey gets hurt. But that's no instant impact to the team. The 49ers, if the 49ers end up trading away one of their big wide receivers, then Pearsall just fills in behind that. So they're not any better at wide receiver this year. The guard they got helps. That gets a better. Renardo Green, I don't think, is a big help, and Mustafa's not a big help. Guerendo is not going to play ahead of McCaffrey or Mitchell. So I just don't see that the 49ers got a whole lot better. They just didn't get better from this draft.
RC, it sounds like if you were in John Lynch's shoes at 31, you like Pearsall, but I'm getting the sense that instead of taking a receiver there, you might have went offensive lineman at 31. Is that fair to say, or would you have stuck there and taken Pearsall?
I might have gone Pearsall looking at the big picture of, I think they might be seeing a future where they don't have Ayuk at Debo, or at least Debo won't be there after this season. I don't think Debo Samuel will be a 49er. So they've got to get ready for that future. And then if Ayuk's going to be crazy expensive and maybe they just don't want to pay him, which I wouldn't either. I wouldn't pay a wide receiver what he's going to be asking. So I might have taken Pearsall there because this is the kind of draft where the talent was at wide receiver. But then I would have used all of my other picks to try to get better on the offensive line, not safety, not corner. I just don't think Renardo Green's going to just plug and play as a starting corner.
Okay, let's move on to the NFC South, RC. Last place team in that division, the Carolina Panthers. They originally didn't have a first round pick because they used that as part of the deal to get Bryce Young last year. They traded it to the Bears, and obviously that ended up being the number 1 overall pick this year, and Bears took Caleb Williams. But instead, the Carolina Panthers actually traded into the last pick of the first round to the which was owned by the Chiefs, traded to the Bills, and then eventually traded to Carolina. They took Xavier Leggett, wide receiver from South Carolina. With their second round pick, they took Jonathan Brooks, a running back from Texas. And in the third round, they took Trevin Wallace, linebacker out of Kentucky. RC, does this really move the needle at all for the Panthers? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What are your thoughts?
Does not move the needle. Is lining up to be almost a completely unnecessary draft. I mean, the Panthers' problem is not their wide receivers; it's their quarterback. But they're running around thinking that it's their wide receivers and their offensive line, which their offensive line needs to get better. So they think that they solved that by throwing millions at it in free agency, but I don't think they got quite the bang for their bucks. So Leggett in, putting Jonathan Mingo to the bench, to me, that's not a big upgrade or a big change. Jonathan Brooks is nice, but running backs in the NFL, Chuba Hubbard could have been just as fine. They could have gotten a cheap running back in free agency. They could have got any other running backs. So spending a second on Jonathan Brooks, yeah, he's walks in and he's their best running back, but is that really going to change the Panthers over what they had before? I don't think so. Then all the defensive players that they took, I'm just looking at the names and there's nobody I had marked as, ooh, that's a special play, that's a special pick. It's like they went out of their way to take defensive players I didn't like. So I just don't see Carolina getting any better from this draft.
Well said. Give me your best pick, worst pick, and give the Panthers fans something to be excited about. RC, who could be their sleeper here?
If I was going to give a Panthers fan something to get excited about, it's that the NFL is changing its ways and not going 4 and 5 years with a mistake quarterback. They're bellying up to the bar now, and after about 2 years, they're like, okay, we screwed up. Let's make a change. So there's hope that Carolina will come to their senses in 2025 and make a move at quarterback, whatever that move needs to be. The best pick is probably Jonathan Brooks, just because he of all the guys who they drafted, the one guy who's probably going to start day one. That's if his knee checks out from his ACL. That's the other thing I don't get. You're the Panthers. If you're needing a running back, was Jonathan Brooks that much better than everybody else that you had to go and draft him and cross your fingers and hope that his knee is going to be fine? They won't know that his knee is fine until the season gets going. So I know you're trying to use the force to fix your camera. It's starting to come in. It's coming in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So, I mean, Brooks is going to play, but I don't know that he's going to make a massive difference, but he looks like the best player. And by saying that the running back that you took in the second round is your best draft pick, that's not saying a whole lot.
What would be their worst one, RC?
Pretty much every defensive player that they drafted would be tied with that.
Jeez. Is there any sleeper that you like? Give them something to chew on here, RC. I feel bad for them, even as a Falcons fan.
Not much to chew on here. Undrafted free agent out of, I think, Virginia State, Willie Drew, a corner, I think can make this team and potentially be useful to them. Perhaps even making it to the starting lineup someday. Bit of a project, but that's the only name when I look over all the kicker that they picked up was one of the worst kickers that I saw. The defensive players that they got, I'm like, I think they're all overrated. Trevin Wallace is just doesn't do anything for me. Jatavian Sanders is nice, but Tommy Tremble is better at tight end. It's just a bunch of guys that we're never going to remember. And then cross your fingers that Brooks his knee is fine and he's going to be fine. So if his knee is fine, you got yourself a nice little starting running back. So that's a good thing.
I feel like I'm pulling your teeth trying to make you say something nice about the Carolina Panthers. So I'll make this next segment a little interesting for you, RC. Pretend I'm the owner of the Panthers. You're the GM. And I come up to you and say, hey, Fischer, we're keeping Bryce Young. This is what's going to happen. You're going to build around him. I don't care. You're not moving off of him. What would have been your pick in the first round?
I hope I would have.
You can't quit. You can't quit your job.
If the owner came to me and said that, I assume that's like, 2024. So my first response would be, I don't work for you anymore. I quit when you said we were taking Bryce Young. I wanted to take CJ Stroud. And when you said, no, we're taking Bryce Young, I handed in my resignation because I don't want to be a part of this Titanic.
Okay, so, here's a check for $10 million
but now
that says I wanted Stroud, you wanted Young.
You're paying me a ton of money, and we're going to make Bryce Young work. I would have endorsed hiring Dave Canales, and I would have gotten a bunch of bubble screen wide receivers. I would have never traded for Deontay Johnson. I would have got a bunch of bubble screen wide receivers and let Bryce Young throw a bunch of bubble screens or bubble screen speedsters who can either, take a step back off the snap and get a quick pass, or fake that and sprint deep and confuse the defense with trying to get the greatest show on turf speedsters to make up for the fact that Bryce Young isn't very good.
RC, thank you for bearing with me there. I know that was difficult for you, but I'm excited to announce that we're moving
It was
on to.
it was very profitable last year. I'm happy to talk about the Carolina Panthers.
Let's move on to the Atlanta Falcons, who were actually profitable for you this year because you bet on them to take a quarterback with the 8th overall pick, and you hit on that, which is great. And that was one of the most controversial moves in the draft. So let's go recap their top 100 picks. Michael Penix, quarterback, Washington. That's what they took 8th overall. 35th overall pick, their second round pick. They traded up to get Rook Orohoro, D tackle out of Clemson. And with the 74th overall pick, Braylon Trice, defensive end from Washington, who was Penix's teammate on the other side of the ball. RC, are you sitting with the mainstream media here saying that this is an awful draft? This is how could they take a quarterback here, or how do you feel about this?
It winds up to be a pretty bad draft, but the fact that they got Penix makes it a plausible draft, and we may look back on it and say it ends up being a great draft if Penix is as good as we think he is. So I'm all for them taking Penix. It makes all the sense in the world from the importance and the value of quarterbacks. Now, how they handled it, whether they should have, what type of warning they should have given Kirk Cousins, and whether they did or not, that's a whole different butchering potentially of this opportunity.
I don't think that they needed to give him any warning, RC. The guy only has one playoff win. Aaron Rodgers didn't get a warning. Tom Brady didn't get a warning. Who the heck is Kirk Cousins to get a warning?
If you knew that it was possible that you would be taking a quarterback, you should days in advance and months in advance. When you sign Kirk Cousins, and maybe you don't say it when you sign him because you want to lie to him so you get him to sign, but at some point after you've got him in-house and you're coming down to the final weeks of the draft, you go to him and you go, look, don't be shocked if we take a quarterback. Quarterback is super valuable. You are not going to likely play forever. We're not taking anybody that's going to challenge you. We'll just take somebody for the future. You're our starter. No questions asked. But in this era, you've got to have two quarterbacks. So don't be shocked. The fact that they may not have done that, to me, that's what makes it shaky. But on paper, it's brilliant. Because you're never going to get a shot at a guy like Penix again, in theory.
And that was their hope. They didn't want to draft.
I agree with the Falcons GM. It's like, we're never going to draft this high again, ever. Whether that's the case or not, probably for the next couple years or not, as long as Cousins is healthy, they're not going to be drafting that high. But then if Cousins gets hurt and they just put in Penix, they're not going to be drafting that high with all the team that they have around them. So it makes sense, but I don't know if it blew up the flow of the locker room when Kirk Cousins is going to be your leader, and you kind of punched him in the kidney without telling him it was coming. So,
and the one argument that I understand about this that supports your side is the second, because Cousins is coming off an Achilles. He could start slow, and Penix is really good. He's got a big arm. If Cousins starts slow, he has no cachet built up with the Atlanta fan base. This isn't Aaron Rodgers, to my other point, who won four MVPs, or Tom Brady, who won 6 Super Bowls, right? Like, the fans are always going to back those players. Cousins starts off slow the first 2 games, you're going to hear Penix chants coming out of Atlanta. So that side of the argument I totally get. But RC, what was their best pick, worst pick, and a sleeper that the Falcons fans can get excited about?
Best pick was Penix. Worst pick was Braylon Trice in the 3rd round. And then the sleeper they should get excited about is and somebody we may dig into deeper on a video sometime during the summer, is Isaiah Wooden. I think he's a wide receiver, undrafted free agent. I think he's out of South Utah, if I can remember correctly.
Yep, South Utah, undrafted free agent.
And by virtue of they don't have a whole lot of other sleepers to get excited about, he kind of wins the day. But I liked him throughout this process once I first saw him, figuring he would be an undrafted free agent. So there's a little something there to him. But that's it.
Okay, RC, let's say you were the GM here, okay? And if it's Penix, the only thing you would have done differently is giving Cousins a head up. Fine. But if it wasn't Penix, like what would you have done here? Would you have went quarterback at 8, or would you have done what everybody in the media expected them to do, which is to take the best defensive player?
My thought would have been, given the team that they have with Cousins, and Taylor Heineke is an okay enough backup, as alluring as it is and as logical as it is to get a Penix at 8, I would have looked at my team and go, we are so close. If Cousins is fine with everything we've built up on offense, if we just have a good, continue improving defense, we could win this NFC somehow, some way. So I'm going to bypass getting Penix, even though I get all the logic for it. I'm going to draft Latu from UCLA to finally give me a pass rusher, a high-end pass rusher. And if in a year or two, I'll trust myself to figure out the quarterback position, even if I don't have a top pick. Like, I wouldn't want to have disrupted this whole thing just to get Penix. I don't like. I get why they did it, and I'm kind of more for it than not. But on the flip side, with where they were at, I get the other side of the argument. It's the same argument I make with dynasty fantasy owners: is stop trying to play for 2 years from now when you got a legit contender right now. If you're in a rebuild, then do crazy things. But when you're teed up to be a contender right now, you got to do contender things, not daydreams for 2 years from now. So I think Atlanta may have bitten off more than they can chew here, and it's going to cost them. And they may have to make a move to Penix and move on from Cousins faster than they ever expected. And if they're sitting back going, Penix is going to be better than Cousins, let's see if we can just get a year out of Cousins. Everybody's going to understand if we say that we're redshirting Penix this year and we don't even activate him so that the fans can't chant for Penix. We won't even activate him. We'll redshirt him. We'll make Kirk Cousins feel good. But if anything goes wrong, then we're going to Penix. So from that perspective, it makes all the sense in the world, because if you don't have a quarterback, it don't matter. I mean, the only reason we're excited about the Falcons is they got Kirk Cousins. If they didn't have Kirk Cousins, if this was another year, if somehow the Falcons won that division and had another year of Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder, we're not having any conversations about Atlanta being a contender. So you either have an elite quarterback or you're fighting for attention and you're a nobody.
And that was a realistic possibility, RC. Arthur Smith, before that last game against New Orleans, I don't think he was going to get fired. And according to our guy, Jeff, who's the one that first tipped us off that Atlanta might go quarterback, albeit he thought it was going to be Drake May, but they ended up going Penix at 8. He said that if the Falcons stuck with Arthur Smith, that they were going to ride Desmond Ridder one more year, which to me is like mind-boggling, because when I saw him in 2022, I don't have your scouting lens, RC. I'm not that. I don't want to sit here and act like I know what I'm looking at or I'm as detailed as you. But even with my like untrained eyes, in 2022, he did not look like a NFL quarterback starting those last 4 games. And in 2023, he was probably the worst starter I've ever seen put on the Falcons uniform. And I've watched Joey Harrington. I've watched the Chris Redmond years. That was pretty freaking bad.
Billy Joe Tolliver was better.
That's too far for me. So if he was worse, then I wouldn't know. But but anyways, so with all that being said, RC, if Penix ends up being someone like like at the Mahomes or Josh Allen level, then the Falcons just got lucky and backed into him because they were just disorganized. But the best things in the NFL sometimes just happen by coincidence. So as a fan, I hope that's the case, but I know that's super unlikely.
They just need to get through this. If they can get through this year with Kirk Cousins playing, even if he's got a chip on his shoulder, just get him through this year. And I would sit down with them if I screwed it up ahead of time. I'd sit down with them and go, look, you're our guy. And what's going to happen, worst case, is that he's great and he outplays you. The fans call for him and all that kind of stuff. Then we'll trade you somewhere where you can go start. You're making a blank load of money. You can take us to a Super Bowl. We're redshirting Penix, so don't worry about it. And then next year, all bets are off.
And let's also not forget what happened when the Patriots drafted Garoppolo and the Packers took Jordan Love. Both Brady and Rodgers had incredible seasons because they were playing with a chip on their shoulder. So as a fan, I hope that pushes Kirk Cousins, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be definitely a fun storyline to watch throughout the season. But RC, let's go to as a Falcons fan, let's go hit my least favorite team in the NFL, the New Orleans Saints, who finished second last year. Unfortunately for me, with their first round pick, they took Fuaga out of Oregon State, an offensive tackle who we were all high on. I hate to see him go there, but it was a great pick, especially considering all the injuries and departures they dealt with on their offensive line. So as a Falcons fan, I hate it. As a draft analyst, independent, I love it for them. Second round pick, they went with Kool-Aid McKinstry, defensive back out of Alabama. And that's it, RC. They just had 2 top 100 picks. So what did you make of their draft overall?
This draft is Fuaga's arguably the single best player in this draft. Top 5 for sure. It's hard to say that Jaden Daniels wasn't the best because quarterback is so valuable. So the best quarterback is probably the most valuable asset you can get in a draft. So great job for what was becoming a horrific offensive line. They get a top offensive lineman. Then after that, it may be the single worst draft in the NFL. Yeah,
and that's pretty much my reaction too. I mean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, for example, who they took in the second round, there were a lot of, Nick Saban, he loves to play man-to-man coverage. And I think this year in Bama, there was a stat going around that showed that they were playing more often than not in zone, which isn't typical of Saban, which just speaks to the argument that maybe McKinstry couldn't play man. In the NFL, you definitely need to do that to stay on the field. RC, it sounds like your best pick is Fuaga. We don't need to go into that. Was McKinstry their worst pick, or was there somebody else?
Okay. Worst pick, especially when you take into consideration where it was picked at. Just a total waste of a second round draft picked opportunity. So which is a killer because I don't think they didn't even have a third or a fourth round. So that was going to be their best pick they were going to have for a while. And man, did they butcher it. So that's definitely their worst pick.
Any sleepers for Saints fans to get excited about?
I don't want to waste a bunch of time on something that doesn't really have an answer as I'm looking at it. This draft just stinks. After Fuaga, I'll say Bub Means, the wide receiver out of Pitt. He's pretty good, but he's not better than A.T. Perry. He's not going to be, I don't know that he's going to be a guy that's a superstar, but he's a contributor. He's pretty good.
One thing the Saints have,
they didn't need a just pretty good wide receiver added to the mix.
Yeah, I was about to say the one thing they're really strong in and have a lot of depth is their wide receivers between Olave, A.T. Perry, Rashid Shaheed. So adding him, I don't know that he could really.
Him in the fifth round is that's a solid pick, but it's not an impact. It's not a major impact pick, especially right away.
Knowing how high you are on Fuaga, I'm not even going to ask you what you would have done in the first round. But given that they didn't have a third or fourth rounder, RC, what direction would you have won in with their second round pick instead of Kool-Aid?
Anything but that. I would have put names into a bag from Mel Kiper's draft board in the second round and shook it up and pulled one out before I took Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Wow, he's that bad, huh? You don't think that you think his odds of making it in the NFL are slim to none?
And with the amount of corner talent that was still out there, I'm sure I can't remember where they picked and what corners went after him, but that's what makes it doubly bad is, okay, if you really want to take a corner, there was so many other talented corners to take. Why are you stretching for this guy that has all these red flags off the field and problems on the field, and then you're not going to pick for several more rounds? And then just, I mean, to me, I look at their draft as like Fuaga fell in their lap because all the other picks that they made on purpose, like Spence, if I was wondering if it's before the draft and somebody said, give me 5 players that if a team takes them in the draft, you know you're dealing with a terrible general manager, I would have said Spencer Rattler number 1 and Kool-Aid McKinstry would have been in that top 5 probably. So the Saints get 2 of my markers for terrible personnel and scouting department picks, and they picked them. And then it's not like, wow, they whiffed on those, but look, they got 7 other really, like an Arizona draft where it's like pick after pick after pick after pick. Arizona just kept picking players. We're going, wow, what a great pick. Wow, what a great pick. And that's from the perspective of our scouting, not from the NFL scouting that, we're not grading this ABC like you see the typical draft grades, and that the draft grades are based on what the pre-draft rankings were before we went into this. So people look at it and go, "Ooh, did they get some guys that were higher rated going into the draft? Did they get them later? Okay, we give them credit for that." It's not that. I'm going purely off of my scouting, which I trust way more than the NFL and the consensus scouting. And I've got a decade plus to be able to make that claim. So I just look at this rookie haul down to the undrafted free agents and everything else. And my question would be, what the hell are these guys doing for 4 to 12 months before the NFL draft to come up with this collection of nothing? Fuaga, who anybody could have drafted, and nothing after that. Not even an interesting, to this point, undrafted free agent. I'll be re-looking at the undrafted free agents all summer just to see if I missed anybody.
And they're lucky, RC, because the Jets could have easily taken Fuaga with their 11th pick. They really butchered that one going with Fashanu out of Penn State.
Who's fine, but I definitely would have took Fuaga.
But I mean, if they took Olumayu instead of Fuaga, I think we'd look at this draft a lot. Instead of it being a wash, it would be like
they were one. They hit a home run in their first at bat, and then they struck out 5 times in a row. Their next 5 at bats.
Yeah, exactly.
With runners on base all over the place, they just kept striking out.
Yeah. Well, let's move to the first place team last year, RC, where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they even got a playoff win. They hung in there with Detroit, who we liked a lot and had a deep playoff run themselves in the divisional round of the playoffs. The Bucs had 3 picks in the top 100. First round, they went with Graham Barton, guard out of Duke. Second round, they went with Chris Braswell, defensive end out of Alabama. And in the third round with the 89th overall pick, they took Tyke Smith, defensive back from Georgia. RC, just looking at this, I'm excited that they got Graham Barton just for Rachaad White's sake, because they were terrible at run blocking. But overall, how do you feel about this draft?
I feel like going into this draft in the AFC South it was the worst division in football. That suddenly the Atlanta Falcons were pushed to the top of the mountain with by making a coaching change and by getting Kirk Cousins, and everyone else is in the distance, including Tampa Bay and especially New Orleans and Carolina. And we walk out of it with pretty much all of the teams in this division doing nothing to really help themselves overall or to help push Atlanta. So I say that this ends up being a great draft for the Falcons by virtue of the rest of the division being as bad at drafting as the Falcons were, but at least the Falcons have Penix. Graham Barton is okay. It's fine. He may even be good. So that's at least something. But then their next couple picks, it's like, why are you even in the draft? You're taking guys that are never going to have an impact. You could have got guys off the street. They're undrafted free agents that are as good as some of the guys that you're taking. Just because they played at Alabama and Washington and Georgia doesn't make them, a cut above. Do some scouting already and get some more interesting players. So if I'm a Falcons fan, I love this Buccaneers draft because they did not get better. Jalen McMillan was about the least needed thing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers could have gotten. And what did they do? They waste a third-round pick. The Buccaneers have an offensive line problem, and they have some secondary problems that they could have used one really strong corner to add to the group because they traded Carlton Davis. So, and everything else is in decent shape with them. So what they really need is offensive line help, especially run blocking. So Graham Barton is fine for that. And then they get a corner that isn't a high impact guy. Braswell's going to be a backup for all the talent that they already have at outside linebacker. McMillan's going to be a fourth or fifth wide receiver for them. He's not going to be an impact receiver. Why the heck they drafted Bucky Irvin, I have no idea. But as a Rachaad White holder, as the king of all Rachaad White in the universe, I am so happy they drafted Bucky Irvin because he has no business. He is no threat at all to Rachaad White. Now, if I'm a Tampa Bay fan, I would be like, what did we just do? But I'm sure that the faithful Tampa Bay fans that are message board fans probably are plotting the coup to overthrow Rachaad White with the great Bucky Irving, but it ain't going to happen. I told you it wasn't going to happen with Sean Tucker. It ain't going to happen with Bucky Irving.
RC, sounds like Graham Barton, even though you might have went in a different direction, was their best pick. Who would you say is their worst pick? And give me somebody that those people on the message boards, a sleeper, could be excited about.
Barton was their best pick by virtue of it was a need on the offensive line, and he's pretty good. He could be really good. He could be just average. Everybody talks about, he's so versatile, he can play any position. Part of the problem with that is because he's not great at any one position. So the fact that you can toss him around in different places kind of also means he's not great at any one thing. The worst pick that they made by it's a tie between what a waste of a third-round pick by taking Jalen McMillan with the wide receivers they already have, and then Bucky Irving. If you're going to take a running back, there's so many other running backs they could have taken that would have made sense. Bucky Irving, you got to be kidding me. That's the worst pick. A sleeper, if I look down into the sleepers, the only one that's really catching my attention right off the bat is I think they have a safety undrafted free agent, Rashad Wisdom, who's not too bad. Let me see where he went to school. Is it UTSA? Yeah, he's not bad. And then in the 7th round, they drafted Devin Culp out of Washington, tight end. He's a lot like Jawan Johnson. I think there's an upside with Devin Culp as a receiving tight end, which they don't have. They have a lot of traditional blocky, choppy type of tight ends, bulky tight ends who are decent. Kate Otton's good. Payne Durham's pretty good. Culp is a different type of tight end weapon, so he may play a role, a surprise role on passing downs in the next year or two.
RC, I felt like if we had a fantasy football league going within FF metrics, your fantasy football team name would be Rashad Wisdom. Well, I know it's like you like Barton, and it sounds like if you were the GM of the Bucks, you were going to go for a defensive back to help fill that void that Carlton Davis left. But obviously, in the first round, there was kind of a run on the defensive backs with the Lions trading up to get Terrion Arnold. And I think the Eagles, I don't know if they traded up or they took Quinyon Mitchell right after that. So, RC, you're sitting there at 26. Is there like a corner there that like the third corner in the draft that you would have went for? Or do you think that they should have potentially been the ones to trade up instead of the Lions to get someone like Arnold?
I mean, there was the Max Meltons, and there was a tier of corners after that. But if they weren't there, they already had. I mean, I really like and always have. I thought Zion McCollum was one of the 20 best prospects in his draft, and he's now going to be their starting corner 2 years into be his third year in the league. He was a 5th round draft pick that I thought was a 1st round talent, and now it's starting to show because he's one of their starters now. That's why they moved Carlton Davis out, is because Zion McCollum has come on. So, and then they have Jamel Dean, who's a really good really good at the other corner slot. They have good starting corners. They picked up Tavier Thomas from Houston in free agency. They have enough at corner where I wouldn't have declared it like a state of emergency. The state of emergency was they need more offensive line, especially with the style of play that they have with the deeper passing game. And if they could just open some space up for Rachaad White, things would be so much better. I would have just kept, instead of wasting picks on Smith and McMillan and Bucky Irving, I would have just kept taking offensive linemen or corners, best availables, and hoped of the 3 or 4 that I took that 1 or 2 of them would end up hitting.
Yeah, and apologies to Tampa fans. I failed to mention McMillan as a top 100 pick. So there was 4 of them, and McMillan, the receiver out of Washington, was one of them. So let's move on, RC. Let's go to the Chicago Bears. They finished last in the NFC North, and they made a trade with the Panthers last year, which got them the 1st overall pick this year, where they ended up taking Caleb Williams, quarterback out of USC, everybody's consensus mainstream number 1 overall guy. With the 9th pick, which was their own pick in the 1st round, they ended up going with Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington, who was Penix's favorite target. They did not have a 2nd round pick this year because they traded that, I believe, in the Montez Sweat deal. And in the 3rd round, their last top 100 player, they took Kieran Amegadji, tackle out of Yale. I remember when that pick happened, we were all really confused on the live stream. RC, how do you feel about this draft?
Let me back up real quick. One thing on the Buccaneers thing, because you were saying about McMillan being a top 100 pick. I think Jalen McMillan is an all right wide receiver. I'm just looking at the Bucks going, Trey Palmer's pretty good, and I think Raheem Jarrett is going to end up being a starter for them someday. I just don't see how McMillan was this great grand need, even if they're going to move on from Chris Godwin and Evans in the near future. So you didn't, with all the wide receiver talent, you just didn't need to do that right now. That being said, back to the Bears, I'm not for Caleb Williams, so I think there's a problem right off the bat. Dunzier is fine. I'm skittish about taking wide receivers in the first round, or especially in the top 10. So if I was the Bears GM, first of all, I would have kept my pick last year, drafted C.J. Stroud, and then we wouldn't be having these conversations in the manner that we're going to have them. But I would have passed up on a Dunzier just because there's so much wide receiver talent out there in the world to get. When you're staring down Fuaga as a franchise offensive lineman, or Latu as a franchise pass rusher, I couldn't bypass those two guys to take a really good wide receiver, no doubt. But I could say that about several wide receivers in this draft. You didn't need to use a number 9. Adunze isn't so much better than Lad McConkey and even a Malachi Corley. I mean, differently talented. So Adunze is fine, and I see the need. They're going to have a wide receiver need next year because Allen and Moore are both free agents, and I'm sure they're going to be frustrated and want to leave and not re-sign up unless Chicago overpays them. But I don't think they're going to have the current regime's not going to have a chance. They're all going to get fired because of this draft, because of what they've done the last 2 years by missing on Stroud and then going with Fields and then giving up on Fields and now going with Caleb Williams. It's almost an impossible needle to thread for them that people aren't going to have a fit and want everybody fired. And if Caleb Williams really struggles, even if he's going to be really good in 3 years, which I don't think so, but I'm not radically against it. I know he's going to struggle in year 1. So if he struggles but Jaden Daniels just hits the ground running, and if one of the other quarterbacks, like if Penix ends up getting in somehow and Penix hits the ground running, how can you sit there and stare at Caleb Williams struggling and not look at your GM and go, how stupid are you about quarterbacks? You could have had Stroud, you passed. You wanted to keep Fields, and then a year later, you're like, no, he stinks. Then you put our whole franchise on the line for Caleb Williams, and he's not better than Jaden Daniels or Penix or maybe even Bo Nix for all we know. So I think total chaos is coming to the Bears. There's going to be new coach, new GM, and everything in a year, and then everything's going to be up for grabs. So I don't see anything else in this draft that they did that's radically going to help them. So they're on the Caleb Williams or bust train, and I think that train's going to derail.
RC, who do you think, if we look back on this draft 5 years out, if there was one player on here that you would say that was their best pick, who would it be?
Oh, Adunze will definitely be their best pick.
And it sounds like
I just don't know that I would have taken him at that level. But yeah, he's fine. He's good.
What about worst pick? Are you set that that's going to be Caleb?
Yeah, just because of the number that it was.
Okay. And then any sleepers that you see potentially from either their 4th or 5th round pick or their undrafted free agents, or is it pretty dry?
No, they got a couple decent undrafted free agents. But the one I would highlight would be the defensive end pass rusher out of James Madison, Jamri Kroma, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was probably draft worthy, but because he plays at a overlooked school, because James Madison had several players that are really talented, and I don't think any of them got drafted. But Jamri was a really good pass rusher, really successful pass rusher at James Madison. So, and he went undrafted, but his tape looks really nice. And just for discussion's sake, this past year, 13 games, 19.5 tackles for loss, and 10 sacks. He was 9th in the NCAAs in sacks, and he can't even get drafted because he went to James Madison.
Well, that gives Bears fans something
the NFL for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the new coach next year will really appreciate him.
RC, I'm excited about this next team, Chris's Minnesota Vikings, because we were on the live stream and you had a pretty against the grain view, I think, on the Vikings draft. They only had 2 top 100 players. Obviously, with the 10th overall pick, they took JJ McCarthy, QB out of Michigan, and then they had the 23rd overall pick as well from a trade they made with the Texans earlier this offseason. They traded up because the mainstream's consensus top defensive player, Dallas Turner, was sliding in the draft, and at 17, they went up and got their guy. RC, how do you feel about this one? Do you think this was good, bad, or somewhere in the middle?
This should be the draft that gets the general manager fired, coming off of his first couple drafts and then into this draft. I have no idea what the Minnesota Vikings are doing. They are falling apart at the seams. They're drafting players that, to me, don't make any sense. Where they're taking them, why they're taking them, what they've done as a franchise. If they were going to blow this thing up and they're like, well, we're just not a contender, so we're going to get rid of Kirk Cousins, we're not going to pay all that money, and we're going to get quarterback in the draft, and we're going to start to rebuild this thing, and we're going to get a lot of draft picks, and we're going to really stock the shelves, the kitchen cupboard, so to speak. They didn't do that. They end up with the worst of the name quarterbacks. JJ McCarthy is not a future NFL star quarterback. He's competent. He's a backup level in the new era. He's a backup level. He's like a Sam Darnold. So they don't get any better at quarterback. If they're trying to rebuild their team, I don't know why you go out and spend money on Aaron Jones. Why don't you just get more save that money, but buy more younger players, get draft picks, do something, do anything besides what you're doing. I think Dallas Turner is low impact, especially for a first round draft pick. All their other draft picks were reaches after McCarthy and Turner. Like the two guys, if I was coming out of the first round at the draft, there would be 3 guys just right off the top of my head that were trending as first round draft picks that I'd go, man, if there's a team that drafts JJ McCarthy, Dallas Turner, and Ardarius Mims, the offensive lineman from Georgia, if any team drafts one of those 3 guys, they wasted their first round pick. How the Vikings maneuvered their way to trade up to take 2 of what I would have assumed is the 3 worst trapdoor draft picks. They traded up to get these guys, and now they've got them. This is a disaster. And then everybody they took after that, I'm just looking at the names. They don't even register with me. I mean, Kyrie Jackson is a tall corner that has some hope, but he's also can be a bit of a problem off the field potentially. So I don't know that Dallas Turner is good, useful outside linebacker, but just ask the Arizona Cardinals how drafting lightweight outside linebackers in the first round, how well that's going with Isaiah Simmons and then Xavier Collins. You just can't take a thin outside linebacker in the first round of the draft, to me. So Minnesota gets that, and they get a backup quarterback, and then the rest of their draft could go by the wayside as soon as 1 year later.
RC, for the Minnesota fans that think that JJ McCarthy has it in him to be an NFL quarterback, but the Michigan offense didn't let him realize that potential because they're run first or whatever, but he's a winner, like he's won throughout. What's your response to them? Why should they be potentially nervous about JJ McCarthy starting?
Well, if I want to draft a winner, I'll go draft Stetson Bennett and have he won a national championship, so why don't I draft Stetson Bennett? And this whole narrative of JJ McCarthy wasn't asked to be. When you look at him against top teams, and he had to be in known passing situations in the pocket, having to make multiple reads. It's not happening. He doesn't have the arm strength. When everything is perfect, and I mean, in Minnesota or Michigan had a really good team. It's kind of like with Bryce Young, and why I said Bryce Young was a high probability bust, and it came through gloriously. JJ McCarthy's in a similar boat. And Caleb Williams is going to have this problem too. All of these guys can look great when they're facing a mid-major team, an FCS team, a bad team in their conference with a great offensive line, and they have 5+ seconds to throw, and you got Harbaugh with good play designs, play action. You just have to run the play. You just have to make the throw, and you got a totally protected pocket because you have a great offensive line, and your run game is such a threat that teams aren't pass rushing like madmen to get after you because you're either handing the ball off or you're play action passing and throwing to a specific play. And that's what they had McCarthy do, in part because, well, that's how they wanted to play. And it's effective when, like your Alabama with Bryce Young, when your team is so much better than the opponents, you can get away with that. It's a smart thing to do. But I would say Bryce Young had more improv and pocket talent and awareness than JJ McCarthy does. When Caleb Williams, when JJ McCarthy has to stay in the pocket and be flat-footed and not be able to step into their throw, that they have to throw it flat-footed, that's the test of a quarterback, which is why Justin Herbert's a superstar, which is why Penix is going to potentially be a star. It's guys that can sling it, like Will Levis will be a star. Guys who can sling it without even having to move their feet because they just have that ability. JJ McCarthy doesn't have that ability. And he's not going to sit back in the pocket and make multiple reads and pick defenses apart. He needs a very scripted offense. And just ask Arthur Smith how that goes in the long run when you take a mediocre quarterback and then you overmanage them and overscript them. It doesn't work. You're not going to get far in the NFL. You can win some games. If you can get up and ahead of your opponent with your run game, and not have to have McCarthy lead a comeback or put up major points for you, great. But I don't see Minnesota seems to be being run by who's the defensive coordinator?
B-Flow.
Brian Flores. He seems to be running the team. They seem to be trying to build a defense and Arthur Smith-esque offense that's going to try to just stay close and win games by lack of turnovers and all that. To me, you can't be taken seriously in the NFL if you're going to play Mike Zimmer ball. If you're going to play Arthur Smith ball, you can win games. Mike Tomlin wins games. It is a theory to just not turn the ball over, let the other team make the mistake, just stay close at the end. But you are not going to win divisions, win playoffs, and go to Super Bowls with that philosophy unless you have the 85 Bears as your defense. So McCarthy is the worst of the named quarterbacks. He should have never been a first-round pick. Minnesota is going to pay the price for this in a big way.
RC, for me, the game that stuck out for JJ McCarthy was against Iowa. JJ McCarthy didn't look all that impressive in that game. That's where it first got my attention that oh, maybe this guy can't pan out. But I mean, in the playoffs he was all right. But let me ask you this, RC, if you had to tie your wagon to either the Bears or the Vikings, which draft would you go down with?
For this year or for
this year? Just say would you rather, if you had to pick one to survive, Caleb Williams, Poles, Eberflus, or KOC, JJM, and Kouasi, who do you think's more likely? I know you're not a fan of either, but who do you think's more likely to survive?
I would do the Bears because I would at least have some faith or hope that Caleb Williams could maybe scramble around and run around in circles and make some off-script plays. But Chicago has a better defense. Chicago has a pretty good offensive line. Chicago has some weapons. I think I'd take my chances begrudgingly with Chicago than I would watching Minnesota play Arthur Smith ball. And there was a lot of people who, when Desmond Ridder came out, there was a lot of not a lot. There were some places like Football Outsiders that Desmond Ridder was their number one quarterback and guaranteed star. There are people who love the game manager who look at Bryce Young and go, we love this guy. Who look at J.J. McCarthy and go, we love this guy. We love Ryan Tannehill. We love the guy that's going to run the playbook until they actually get into NFL games and it all falls apart.
RC, let's try to help our friend Chris here and his Vikings, okay? Let's try to give him a little bit of hope. I think their worst pick, it sounds like it's a tie almost between McCarthy and Turner. It sounds like it might be more McCarthy than Turner, but what would be their best pick? And I guess their best pick would also qualify as a sleeper because really they didn't pick again until the 4th round.
Their best hope is that Jared Goff gets hurt and Jordan Love gets hurt. Then the Vikings starts to get into play for winning the division. As far as a good pick goes, honestly, they don't have one.
One guy that I remember that
the kicker from Alabama.
He's bad. Pretty good. Yeah, he's pretty good. What about Dwight McGlothern, that cornerback that they got, the undrafted free agent? Are you high on him?
No. Not ringing a bell as one of my guys that I looked at and was like, oh, I need to keep my eye on him. I think I have just middling grades. Down low, the guys with some hope or guys that I would want to see a little more from. Bo Richter, the linebacker out of Army, I liked all through the process as at least being handy, useful. Gabriel Murphy, I think the UCLA, I think he's the pass rusher. He looked like he had a little something. Donovan Manuel out of Florida International looks interesting. So so who they drafted, I don't see anybody who they drafted where I'm like, wow, what a great draft pick. I have some hope for Kyrie Jackson, but at corner. But really, I'm not excited about their drafts. But undrafted, Murphy, Manuel, and Richter are all somebody that I have my eye on.
Okay, and before we move on, RC, assuming that you were dealt the draft, meaning the Vikings already made the trade with the Texans where they moved up and had those 2 first-round picks, and you already went through free agency, you let Kirk Cousins walk. How would you have handled their 2 first-round picks?
I would have started with I don't know how I could have ever gotten myself into a position of relying on Sam Darnold as my circuit breaker option at quarterback, that if I didn't get the guy I wanted in the draft, it's going to be okay. We got Sam Darnold. I don't know who I would have gotten. I have to go back through the free agency, but it wouldn't have been Sam Darnold. So I would have, if I stepped in at GM like the day before the draft and like they're like, okay, this is your draft. The other GM is just hit the lottery and he retired. This is your draft. I would look at this team and go, we missed the boat because Minnesota's good enough. They're a quarterback away from kind of being like the Falcons, where it's like, if the roles were reversed and Atlanta had Kirk Cousins for years and was always good, but never, took that final step, and then he hit free agency and he went to Minnesota this year in an alternate universe, we would go, oh, damn, man, the Vikings, oof, Detroit better watch out now because here comes the Vikings. I mean, the Vikings have a really good starting lineup, but they have arguably the 32nd best quarterback that's going to start on week 1, whether that's Darnold or JJ McCarthy. And quarterback is everything. So I would have either just said, we're screwed. I am not gonna waste a pick on JJ McCarthy. I'll go get talent at any of the other positions, and we'll just call it a year, and we'll try to find a quarterback. We'll try to get Joe Flacco. We'll try to do something, anything, but draft JJ McCarthy or Dallas Turner. I wouldn't have drafted Dallas Turner in the first round. I don't care what my team was or what my needs were. I am not drafting a safety, a running back, or an outside linebacker. That's not a pure pass rusher disruptor, and I hate those guys in the draft anyway. But I would not take a smaller outside linebacker in the first round. So I would have done anything but what they did. Or I would have packaged those picks and tried to get into the Penix, or just did anything, tried to trade for somebody's backup quarterback that I really liked, but they stepped in it when they did Sam Darnold, and then when I have a feeling Minnesota was probably targeting Penix all along, and then it just got out of their control and they couldn't trade up.
I mean, it sounded like RC that they were really trying their best to get up to number 3 to take May, but I didn't see anything in the news at least that indicated they were interested in Penix. But they even offered, I think, the Patriots 3 first-rounders, that being their 11th, 23rd, and 2025, and they still said no.
I wonder if they think that Penix was going to fall to them, but you're right. Telling that story again about them trying to move up for May just shows me that the Minnesota GM is a problem, and as long as they keep butchering the quarterback position, either have the Falcons problems where they got too many quarterbacks and somebody's pissed. I would rather have that situation than 2 crap quarterbacks with a really good rest of the run. This is a division-winning starting lineup. It doesn't have a lot of depth because they've been so bad drafting the last couple of years, but they got a lot of free agents, good free agents, and they built the offensive line prior to the GM, or maybe the GM was in on the Darisaw pick. Maybe he was there for that. No, that would have been right before him, I think. This offensive line was more built, handed to the new regime. So was Justin Jefferson. They got a starting lineup that could win it, but there's no way they are with this quarterback situation.
Well, Chris better thank us, because I think we spoke more about the Vikings than any other team. Well, I think it's time to move on to the Packers, who finished second in the NFC North and had a surprising playoff run themselves, almost made it to the NFC Championship game, but fell a little short against the Niners. So, RC, they had 5 top 100 picks. First round, they took Jordan Morgan, tackle out of Arizona. Second round, they had 2 picks. First, they went with Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker out of Texas A&M. Then Javon Bullard, defensive back out of Georgia. With their 2 third-rounders, they went with Marshawn Lloyd, running back out of USC. And their other pick in the 3rd round, they went with Tyron Hopper, linebacker out of Missouri. So where do you land with this draft?
I like Jordan Morgan, so it starts out as a good draft right there. I see the potential in Edgerrin Cooper, but I also see potential problems. But for a 2nd-round pick to take a stab at it, not too bad. I wouldn't be taking a safety. There was no safety in this draft that should have went day 1 or day 2. So that's a wasted pick in the 2nd round. Could have gotten any number of a million things besides that. I don't know why they felt the need to get Marshawn Lloyd, who's a pretty decent running back, but they got a ton of other running backs, so that's no real help. The real help is going to come from Jordan Morgan, and then it's a bunch of talented guys that can help if there's injury. but I don't see a lot of high impact with the exception of Jordan Morgan.
So would you say that their best pick in this draft was that Jordan Morgan, you would say?
Yeah, that'd be the safest pick. And I get taking a wild card shot on Edgerrin Cooper. They have him penciled in as a middle linebacker. I don't think he's going to be a middle linebacker. I think he's going to be more of an outside type of linebacker, pass rusher, not a traditional linebacker.
And would Bullard be the worst pick that they made, or was there someone that?
Yeah, because I mean they picked decent players, roster fillers, but with a second round pick is such an opportunity, and to blow it on a safety on a okay-ish safety, that's a huge wasted opportunity. The guy that they drafted in the 4th round, Evan Williams, safety, is probably better than Bullard, or could be better than Bullard.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I feel like all these guys are from the big schools like Georgia, all the ones that made it to the college national, to the playoffs or whatever, they're always going to get like a little bit bumped higher, Alabama, Georgia guys compared to the rest. So it's crazy that like someone, for people that don't follow the draft as closely, is defensive back out of Oregon, who they couldn't even, win the Pac-12 national championship, that he could potentially beat someone from the Georgia defense that, is so highly regarded. And you would think that all these Georgia defenders are going to translate well to the NFL, but that's not always the case.
Just ask the Philadelphia Eagles, the worst defense in the second half of last year, how having a bunch of Georgia defensive players doesn't translate into instant gold.
Yeah, and we'll get to the Eagles too. But just as a spoiler, I was a little excited about their draft. But RC, let's get into sleepers with the Packers. Let's give the Packers fans something that they can watch throughout preseason. Who's that player that can just pop out of nowhere and become a contributor for this team?
Well, we're definitely fans of Jarvion Howard at Alcorn State, the running back, who we already did a profile on. I just hated that he landed here because he is never going to get past Jacobs, Lloyd, Dillon, or Emmanuel Wilson. So he's going to have to go to the practice squad. He's someone to watch, but he's never going to make an impact because you already got 4 really good running backs ahead of him. So what may end up being their smartest pick is taking Michael Pratt, the quarterback, in the 7th round, who's got an arm, who's got one of the better arms in this draft, who's got a little something that you could groom him, and in a couple of years you might have something. Sean Clifford is a good quarterback. Michael Pratt is a good quarterback prospect, and Jordan Love started to come through last year. So the Packers have quarterback depth, which makes them a dangerous team because they also have a pretty good offensive line and tons of talented wide receivers. So I don't think they got radically better here, but it wasn't a bad draft. I would have done it differently, but it wasn't a bad draft.
Fair enough. And big shout out to Jarvion Howard. If you guys haven't checked out his video that we did, we pretty much broke down his all of his pro day or whatever. He's from an HCBU, Alcorn State. So that was a fun one, and it was cool to just watch him get drafted throughout the just watch him. No, he didn't get drafted, but signing as an undrafted free agent. That was pretty awesome to see that come to light, and best of luck to him. RC, would you have done anything different than getting Morgan with the Packers' 1st round pick?
That was a good solid pick. We liked Morgan. I get taking a shot on Edgerrin Cooper and seeing what you can do with them. I just wouldn't have made that Bullard pick, and then I wouldn't have made that Lloyd pick in the 3rd. That was an unnecessary thing for them with their running back room that they already had, and the running backs that would have been available on day 3. You didn't need to spend a day 2 pick on Marshawn Lloyd. And it's not that he's not good. So I mean, it may come to fruition if Jacobs gets badly hurt that you're going to be thankful you had Lloyd. But there seemed like there'd be many other things the Packers could use when they're trying to chase down the Lions than to get a running back when they already have Dylan and Emmanuel Wilson.
Let's move on to the NFC North champions, the Detroit Lions, who only had 2 top 100 picks, but RC, I'll keep banging my drum on this. Had they had an average secondary last year, I think they would have won the Super Bowl. And what did they do with their 2 top 100 picks? They addressed the secondary. Not only did they do that there, but they also, picked up a couple pieces in free agency. So with their first round pick, they actually traded up to the 24th overall spot and took Terrion Arnold, defensive back from Alabama. And in the second round, they took Ennis Rakestraw, defensive back from Missouri. Those are their 2 top 100 picks, but I don't think I would have done anything different here. RC hit their weakness. That is their weak spot, and they're trying to address it. So hopefully Arnold or Rakestraw hits. They obviously made moves in the free agency as well to address the secondary. What do you think of this draft?
It's going to all be based on Arnold. If Arnold is good as we think and as the world thinks, then that's all anybody will remember from this draft. And it was one of their greatest need positions, maybe their greatest. So they addressed it with who we thought was the top guy ahead of Mitchell. So gotta love it. I wouldn't have. Rakestraw's not good enough to me to warrant a second round pick. And they already traded for Carlton Davis. They drafted Terrion Arnold. They got Brian Branch. They have Emmanuel Mosley as a backup. They signed that gives them another back. They had already built up cornerback depth once they picked Arnold. They were good. Why they decided to get Rakestraw after that was like overkill, when what they really need was another wide receiver to take the pressure off of Amon-Ra St. Brown, to give Goff something to work with, to scare defenses with. That was another reason that they didn't go to the Super Bowl, was their junky non-Amon-Ra wide receiver started dropping passes in clutch moments. And in the greatest wide receiver draft of our lifetime, they don't draft a wide receiver. I don't get it.
Yeah, that was surprising too. And with their second round pick, they could have got your guy, RC, Malachi Corley. I mean, he went at the top of the third round. The Jets were so pumped to get him. I think that the GM and coach, the day of the second and third rounds, they were exchanging text messages saying that something along the lines that we're not leaving this draft without Corley. Like they were locked on him. The Jets were, and we'll talk about that too. But he was there for the taking instead of Rakestraw. So summing it up, it sounds like their best pick was Arnold. Their worst pick, maybe Rakestraw, or do you see someone else out there where you're like, oh, that wasn't a good one?
Not that he's terrible. It's just wasn't necessary. I would have used the second on something else. So I'll say it's the worst pick that they had, because they could have done so much. They could have done so much other damage at taking wide receivers, especially. So I'll say that's the worst pick. He's not terrible, but just where they picked him, not necessary.
Just overall, they could have maybe got him later. But let's give the Lions fans something to get excited about during the preseason. Who should they watch for as like this sleeper that can come out of nowhere and become a big contributor in 2024?
They did what a lot of teams should do, and that's they took a bunch of offensive linemen on day 2 and wild card offensive linemen. Giovanni Manu, who is an international player that they drafted strictly off of a pro day workout because he's not a traditional football player. He's converting to play in the NFL. That's the type of guy, if you're going to take chances on things, you take chances on offensive linemen later in the draft. And they picked up 2 offensive linemen that are interesting prospects in the draft on day 3. And then they signed a couple of undrafted free agent offensive linemen who have a little bit of hope. So one of those linemen may pan out and it be a wise draft, whether it's one of the drafted ones or one of the undrafted ones. So one of the linemen is the sleeper. I just don't know which one. I guess the most interesting one is going to be the international player, Manu.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes for them. And I think if you were sitting in their spot, what they did with Arnold in the first round, you approve of it. Probably wouldn't do anything different. So let's not even get into that. But let's move on to the NFC East. Last place team there, the Washington Commanders. They had 6 top 100 picks, one short of the Arizona Cardinals. I'll start reading them off to you. With the second overall pick, they went with Jaden Daniels, quarterback from LSU. Then they had 3 second-round picks. First one, they went with Jerzon Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois. Second pick, they went with Mike Sandstrill, defensive back out of Michigan. And their last second-round pick, they went with Ben Sinnott, tight end from Kansas State. Then they had 2 third-round picks. They went Brandon Coleman, guard from TCU. And with the last pick in the third round, they went with Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver out of Rice. RC, sounds like, I mean, I know that they had a lot of depth on the D line or whatnot, but it just, to me, looks like a pretty good draft. What says you?
When I look at Luke McCaffrey, I then think about all those teams that needed a wide receiver and had second-round picks like Detroit Lions that could have took Luke McCaffrey. It was on a silver platter for them, and they took another corner instead. I see Washington taking – they probably got 6 minimum starting players out of this draft. I mean, we're going through teams that might have only gotten 1 legitimate starter. The Commanders pull 6, and up and down the draft. I mean, they were making good draft picks, on day 3, and then they signed a couple of interesting undrafted free agents. They hit a home run. This is arguably the best draft, because just getting Jaden Daniels, getting a franchise quarterback, already gives them a huge advantage of having a good draft, quote unquote. But then when you put all the picks that, I mean, they hit gold or silver on every pick they made for like their first 6 or 7, first 5, 6 picks. There were guys I might have done differently. I might have taken differently, or I wouldn't have reached for at that round or whatever. But the players they took are legit NFL players. I was highly impressed with what Washington did in this draft, and arguably had one of the best undrafted free agency periods as well. So I don't think this was luck. This is, better watch out for this GM and this team. They're doing what the Minnesota Vikings are not doing.
RC, would you say that who would be your best pick that they made and worst pick that they made in this draft?
I mean, the whole draft is going to be based on Jaden Daniels. So if you take that away, the next best pick was probably either Newton as a plug-and-play defensive tackle, or if Brandon Coleman ends up being a good, versatile tackle guard, either one of those could be the best picks. I really like Luke McCaffrey. That's a sexy pick, but I'd rather have a defensive lineman hit or an offensive lineman hit than a wide receiver.
What about your worst pick? Where you go like, what were they thinking? Or if there's no one like that, if you really like this draft, just best bust probability, I guess.
I would say they did, as I can see, and I like Ben Sinnott, the tight end, who is really more of an ace blocker, fullback, H-back, but can block and play tight end. I don't know that I would have used a second round pick on him, but he's gonna be very useful. He's the kind of guy that is on Super Bowl teams that you just don't talk about much, but you're like, thank God we've got this guy. So I don't know that I would have taken him in the second round, but it's not going to backfire. They're never going to look back and go, well, we drafted Rakestraw and he's a bust. That Sinat's definitely going to be something for them. So I don't really see a terrible pick.
Well, it sounds like Adam Peters, who is the first-year general manager in Washington, picked up a few things from the Niners, where he was the assistant GM, worked in their scouting department too. So it's, this draft is evidence of that, and especially.
Or he was the brains of it, because once he left, the 49ers didn't really have that great of a draft.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Fair point.
Anybody can hit on their first round pick because there's so much talent and there's so many inputs on who the top guys are. You got a first round pick, you pick a Ricky Pearsall, you pick you get a Jaden Daniels, any person could make a good first round pick. It's what do you do from there? And that's when I look at all he took down into the undrafted. Maybe my favorite undrafted free agent of all was going to be the cornerback out of Colorado State. Chig, and I don't even know how to pronounce his last name because I usually watch the tape with the sound off so I can focus. He may be, I think he's a starter level corner maybe as soon as this year. And they got him as an undrafted free agent. While the Lions are taking Rakestraw in the second round.
That's incredible. And Washington definitely has holes to fill too. So it's good that they were able to address it across the board. So there you go. RC gave you a sleeper right there, that corner from Colorado State. I know another one, even though he's a top 100 guy, he was 100th overall, but Luke McCaffrey is another name to watch as a sleeper there. RC's excited about him.
Yeah. And he's great.
I don't know, RC, I'm assuming you wouldn't do anything differently at 2 overall. You like Jaden Daniels, so I'm pretty sure that's what you would.
I'd have been thrilled. I would have been just praying that the Bears really did take Caleb Williams, and then when they did, I would exhale with relief.
Let's move on to the third place team in the NFC East, the New York Giants, who obviously lost Daniel Jones last year due to injury, and their season kind of went sideways. They had a little pop in the middle of the season with Danny DeVito going crazy, but Daboll and the general manager might be nearing the end there, and with their first round pick, RC, they went Malik Neighbors, who could be the top wide receiver coming out of this draft, but he's stuck on such an offense that he might not be able to produce right away or look good. With their second round pick, they went with Tyler Nubbin from defensive back out of Minnesota, and their third round pick and their final top 100 pick, Andrew Phillips, defensive back out of Kentucky. RC, I know you like Neighbors, but how do you feel about the rest of the draft?
I like Neighbors, but I wouldn't have taken him. The Giants need so many things, especially an offensive line, and with all the offensive line talent, I would have either traded back or I would have just took Fuaga there. I wouldn't have wasted time on a wide receiver as a top 10 pick. As good as Neighbors is, I'd rather have an elite offensive lineman than an elite wide receiver, especially when my quarterback stinks. So what's going to be the point of having this great wide receiver if I got no quarterback that can really throw it to him? So if I was the Giants, I'd just be thinking towards the future and taking the best available player. And to me, when you have a high draft pick, you got to take, if the quarterback's not there to take, which, the Giants could have took Penix, I guess. But if you're not going to go there, you have to assess your team and go, we're terrible. Let's get offensive linemen and shut down corners. And they got neither. Instead, they are going to get into a wide receiver without a quarterback then they commit the cardinal sin of taking a safety in the second round.
RC, I think it's fair to say that if we look back on this draft 10 years from now, it's probably going to be Neighbors from LSU that we look at as their best pick or the player that pans out. Who would you say is their worst pick?
Definitely. As much as I like the safety, Tyler Nubin, he's a great kid, but he's just an average player. There was no reason to take him in the second. There's no reason to take any safety from this draft in the first 2 days of the draft. It's just a waste of draft capital. So, of course, the Giants, that's exactly what they do. So that's an easy worst pick that they made. But there are several picks after that I just shake my head and go, what were they thinking? I like Andrew Phillips, and then the rest of the draft, I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah, and it's funny because what do you call it? When we go over to their sleepers, RC, there are two players there that we really scouting profile videos on. One of them being, I think, Jonathan Giles signed with New York, and the other guy, Miller, that we did a report on, is also with the Giants, even though he wasn't part of the draft. They signed right before. But is there anyone you see within the Giants that can come, and let's throw Miller in the mix too, that can come and shock you from their undrafted free agents or later round picks?
I mean, I'm a big fan of Giles, but that's going to be under development, and I think Malik Neighbors is really good. I think Jalen Hyatt is way better than people give credit. Wan'Dale Robinson is useful. Isaiah Hodgins is better than people give credit to. Darius Slayton is better than people give credit. They've got a lot of good wide receivers, so they didn't need, per se, Malik Neighbors, but it's fine. But now Giles joins this and has to get past a lot of guys. He's headed to the practice squad, I'm sure. I just want to see him get his chance in the preseason and see how he competes, because he was at the D2 level. See how he competes with the NFL guys. But if he pans out, it'll be a couple years from now. Dante Miller could hit the ground running as a return man, and the Giants running back situation is the opposite of their wide receiver situation. So if Miller's really good, he could run right up into a role fast, because Eric Gray's just okay, Tyrone Tracy's just okay. So Miller could have some impact in the return game and screen passes, the hurry up offense, and all of that. But that's a long shot too.
Yeah, and you kind of already talked about what you would have done if you were sixth overall. So if you were the Giants GM and were picking sixth overall, so
I would have traded it and gotten more picks, or just got the best player, non-quarterback, and got Fuaga and just started building for the future. But if you're Brian Daboll and you're going to get fired after this year if you don't do well, then you probably got to take a Malik Neighbors. You got to take impact players, because you're going to get fired. So what does it matter 3 years from now? You got to get guys for right now. Only Neighbors is for right now. Then everybody else they drafted isn't going to start.
Yep, fair point. Okay, let's move on to the second place team, RC, the Philadelphia Eagles, who were once upon a time 10-1 during the 2023 season, and then just had a brutal collapse, which ended with a first-round exit in the wild card round, where they got blown out by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Eagles just dismantled, and one of the reasons why was that they had a pretty weak pass defense, but they also just imploded internally. So they had 3 top 100 picks. First one right off the bat to address that secondary, they went with Quinyon Mitchell, defensive back from Toledo. Then with their second round pick, they went Cooper DeJean, the defensive back who will probably play safety out of Iowa, or people are at least projecting him to play safety. And their last top 100 pick, Jalix Hunt, defensive end from Houston Christian. RC, what's your overall sentiment here? Do you like it, not like it, somewhere in the middle?
Their draft was definitely better than average. They have so many problems on defense, and They drafted a lot of good to useful talent. I don't know that they got a home run player. Quinion Mitchell might be, but I think Terrion Arnold is better. But I could see Mitchell being end up being the top corner from this class. So that was a great need. They addressed it. Cooper DeJean as a player, I don't love him at corner. I like him more as a safety, but he's definitely going to be. It's definitely useful to the secondary. So they got two useful. Their secondary was so god awful last year, and they got two useful pieces for that secondary. So that makes them they got better. Jalix Hunt is a really promising uh, edge rusher prospect that may need a year or two, but that's a good to me. That's a safe pick for the third round. Jeremiah Trotter may end up starting day one. That was a solid pick. So there's four, potentially five guys, one of them being an undrafted free agent, Gabe Hall out of Baylor, that can have an impact this year. So that's a good draft, and it's on the side of the ball that they were having all their problems with. I don't like anything hardly about their offensive draft and free agency, but this is going to be more about the good that they did on defense.
And I'm sure Philadelphia fans are aware of this, but for those of you that don't know, Jeremiah Trotter Sr. was a longtime Philadelphia Eagle player, so it's kind of cool that the Eagles drafted his son, and we'll see how Trotter Jr. pans out, linebacker out of Clemson. He was taken in the 5th round. RC, it sounds like your best pick that they made is Quinion Mitchell. Who would you say, who's that one pick that was a head scratcher for you?
Easy. Will Shipley. He's never going to make it in the NFL, I don't think. I'll see him in the preseason, see if I can be proven wrong. But every time I watch that guy's tape, I'm like, I don't get this at all. I don't know why anybody would draft him. And then the Eagles go and draft him in the 4th round.
Yeah, and there's a long pecking order before Shipley. Shipley might even just be a practice squad guy with Barkley there, obviously, and they have Gainwell. So we'll see if he ends up being the 3rd running back. Maybe he will, and I'm kind of overreacting to it.
I'm frightened by if I looked at a list, and I'm not going to now, look at all the players who, the next 10 or 15 players that went after Will Shipley, and I would just be shaking my head of what the Eagles could have done with that still very valuable pick. They got a running back who they didn't need. That's a waste. That they could have gotten any undrafted free agent off the street to be a number 3 running back.
Who's that player, RC, for Eagles fans to keep an eye on in the preseason that isn't a top 100 pick, maybe an undrafted free agent that you think can just provide an immediate contribution to this team?
The one I'm going to watch is Johnny Wilson out of Florida State, wide receiver. He has a real problem with his hands of catching the ball. On one play, he'll make an amazing catch, and then the next play, he'll drop the easiest pass you could throw to him. So there's going to be moments where Johnny Wilson looks like the steal of the draft, and then there's going to be moments of, oh, Lord, what did we do? I'm interested to see if he can put it all together, because if he was just a marginal pass catcher, not a bad pass catcher, if he was just marginal, he would be in top 50, possible 1st round pick, because he's so athletic at a giant size. He gets off the snap and gets open faster or better than just about anybody in this draft outside of Ladd McConkey. But then when you consider Wilson's size, it's stunning how fast his feet are. But what good is it if you're going to get wide open off the snap and get thrown a 5-yard in rocket and it goes clanking off your hands, but you're open by a yard, but you can't catch?
RC, if you were the GM, would you have went Mitchell there? It sounds like you were higher on Arnold, so you might have
Yeah, I mean, I might have taken um, Arnold, but I got no problem with them going Mitchell.
Okay. Well, let's move to the last team in the NFC, the Dallas Cowboys, who are the NFC East champions. People in the mainstream were kind of going crazy that they didn't replace Tony Pollard, but they did sign Zeke Elliott, which was a good move. But let's walk through their top 100 picks. They had four of them. First round, they went Tyler Guyton, tackle out of Oklahoma. Second round, they went with Marshawn Nealon, defensive end from Western Michigan. And with their two third-round picks, they went Cooper Beebe, guard out of Kansas State, and Marist Liafau, linebacker from Notre Dame. RC, their line has been, at one point, like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, they were dominant. They're sort of getting older. Some pieces are gone. They obviously lost one of their guys to the Jets. Now they got Guyton. They draft BB. Did you like what they did on the offensive line here?
Yeah, this may end up being a real gem because of what they did on the offensive line with Guyton and BB. So if you're gonna burn top 100 picks, and if you're avoiding and don't need certain skill players, you want to load up and either shut down corners or offensive linemen. So they did the offensive lineman route. So, and both of those guys are pretty hopeful, pretty promising. So I think Dallas had a sneaky good draft that's getting blasted because they didn't take a running back of all things, with everybody running around saying running backs are devalued. So then Dallas doesn't value them, and then people get mad that they're devaluing the running back position. But they devalued it and went for other things, and most of what they got, to me, made sense. I would have taken a running back over maybe like Kalen Carson at corner in the fifth round. There was running backs all throughout the draft, but they didn't even. There was a couple decent undrafted free agent running backs like the kid from Alcorn State that we've profiled. They didn't even sign him as an undrafted free agent. So there was opportunity, but I'm not worried about their running back situation, especially when they're beefing up the offensive line. So the defensive guys they got, some of them are head scratchers for me, but I know this. When it comes to day 3 and undrafted free agent defensive players, their general manager, de facto general manager, Will McClay, is as good as there is, better than me, at scouting day 3 and undrafted free agent defensive players. So I see some players on here that I'm going, why did they take them? But I will pause and go and defer that Will McClay probably knows something, and I'll go relook at these guys and go, oh yeah, I missed that or didn't come up in the numbers. So I'll assume this sea of defensive players probably has some pretty good players within it, and then combined with a couple good offensive linemen, that can be a really good draft.
Who's your best pick from their draft, and who do you think will end up being their worst pick?
Has to be Guyton as the best, and then I'm going to say the UCLA linebacker that they took in the 3rd round really made me scratch my head. But
the Notre Dame linebacker.
But that means I really have to go relook at that, because if they're taking him in the 3rd round, Will McClay probably saw something that I need to drill down more on and see if I agree or disagree.
And for the Cowboys fans, RC, you talked about Will McClay, really being solid with his day 3 undrafted free agents. I know that maybe those guys weren't on your list, but if you had to just pick one that they should watch and keep an eye on, who would that guy be?
That's an easy answer for this one because arguably the best safety that I watched on tape pre-draft, and he has numbers and a profile and a pro day to go with it. Manny Johnson, who I believe is out in Nevada, undrafted free agent, arguably the best safety in this draft. And especially when you consider the devaluation of the safety and all these teams that were drafting second and third round safeties when Amani Johnson was out there, that's a Will McClay special.
Yeah. All right. And it sounds like if you were sitting at 29th overall as or I guess they traded back for that pick, but you don't have any issues taking Guyton.
Nope. There might have been another tackle I might have had more interest in, but I could totally see Guyton. If the Packers picked Morgan ahead of Guyton, I might have taken Morgan, but I got no problems with Guyton.
Okay. Well, that wraps up all the divisions and their respective like draft analysis. But RC, let's pick a winner from each division and then pin them up against each other and pick the best draft out of this entire conference. Let's start with the NFC West. Who do you think had the best draft out of the Cardinals, Seahawks, Rams, and 49ers?
Arizona.
Yep. I don't think that was
Rams had a good one too, but I have to give it to Arizona right now.
7 top 100 picks, all of them pretty solid. It's hard to argue against that. Now let's move to the NFC South, RC. Out of Carolina, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Tampa Bay, who had the best draft?
Boy, this was a bad. I'm going to say Atlanta just because of Penix, but it might have blown up their locker room and ruined this year or ruined Kirk Cousins. I don't know. But I think Kirk Cousins will get over it. I think him and Penix will be fast friends. Their backgrounds are going to connect. So I think Cousins will ultimately be okay with it. So for that reason, I give it to Atlanta.
Okay. NFC North. Bears, Vikings, Packers, Lions. Who had the best draft?
Not the Vikings. Probably tip it towards Detroit, Green Bay split. If I had to pick one, I think Green Bay might have had a deeper draft, even though the Lions got Arnold, which was a huge need. There wasn't a whole lot of meat on the bone after that, so I'll tip it to the Packers.
All right, Packers winners of the North as far as draft class goes. NFC East, Commanders, Giants, Eagles, Cowboys. I already know where you're going to go with it, but
not
go
even
ahead
a
and
debate.
just announce it.
Yeah, not even a debate. It's Washington.
Okay, now let's pin up the North and the South, East and the West. So from the East, we have the Commanders going up against Arizona. I feel bad because these are probably my two favorite drafts.
That's a bad matchup because they're the two best in the NFC, and honestly, I'm looking forward to going through a deep analysis of the top drafts, and these will be two of the contenders. But I have to give it to Washington because they got a franchise quarterback.
Yep, fair enough. And then from Green Bay and Atlanta, where do you lean?
I'd say maybe Green Bay had the smarter draft, but if quarterback is everything, you could say Atlanta had the best draft. So either one of them, whoever you want to put, they ain't going to touch the Commanders. So they're going down.
It sounds like Commanders 1A, Cardinals 1B to me. And then, Packers had a good draft. Atlanta could have a good draft if Penix hits, but that's how I'm sort of summarizing it.
Yeah, and what I hate about that is, as a bettor from all of this, you're like, wow, Atlanta and Washington have gotten so much better. that it's not. It's probably going to be. It's going to take a year for it to all really sink in. I don't know how turnkey fast it's going to be. So I want to bet those two teams over, but that 6.5 win line is just kind of like right on the edge of I don't know. And then they're squeezing you if you want to take the over. So it's not making me. I really want to do something about how good the Arizona and Washington situation is betting wise, but the odds aren't drawing me in just yet. I am looking at, and I think I've even taken a first small position in the Commanders to win the division at plus 1,000.
Wow, that would certainly be a shocker. But hey, they had a pretty strong draft, and if Jaden Daniels turns out to be a franchise NFL QB, they definitely got something brewing over there. I don't have a lot of hope in Dan Quinn, but Cliff Kingsbury's pretty creative, so perhaps he could get that offense going.
If the Eagles didn't fix their defense and Dallas is just lacking in just not an obvious great deal, just good, then Washington's just sitting out there, maybe a Dak Prescott injury away from, or a Jalen Hurts injury away from sneaking into the division race. I mean, for the odds, I'm certainly am not going to put serious money on it, but for plus 1,000, like last year after the draft, I put some minor money on very long shot odds of Houston and Indianapolis winning the South when we saw their draft. When everybody assumed it was Jacksonville, we were betting Houston and Indianapolis after the draft when doing an analysis like this, and I just needed one of them to hit it because the odds were so nice, and of course Houston got it. Indianapolis almost did, but Houston did, and all based on their draft. Once they had C.J. Stroud and once they had Anthony Richardson in place, with the rest of their draft being decent too, we were betting it and it hit. So I don't know that Washington is not in that same boat because Jaden Daniels to me is not as good as Stroud or Anthony Richardson, but he's good. And if things fall the right way, maybe Washington is going to be disruptive in this division.
Yep. And there are three major pillars, RC, I feel like in every off season where we start betting on division winners and win totals. First is free agency. What did these guys do in free agency? And maybe you can throw the coaching staff in there too. What changes did you make, right? Then you have the draft. So we're done with phase 2. Phase 1 was that. Phase 2 is the draft. We completed it. The last main phase, in my opinion, is the schedule. Now, how does that look? How favorable is it? How many games are they playing with teams coming off a bye? Or how many games do they have where they're well rested going up against the maybe not so rested opponent? Or if you're a dome team, do you have like December road games, et cetera, et cetera? That's where you could really start putting it all together. So right now we have two of the main pieces of the puzzle, but we're probably going to have a lot of amendments and changing of our minds as the schedule comes out. And obviously preseason plays into that too if there are injuries, but you can't really account for that right now. So those are the three major ones in my eyes. RC, before we sign off, do you want to let the audience know what's upcoming on FF Metrics?
Just constant weekly work on Dynasty Rookie Draft top 300 rankings with commentary and strategy. That's an all summer thing, and what to trade, how to trade within it. And then same thing for Dynasty, top 600 offensive players, top 500 IDPs, where they rank, how valuable they are for Dynasty, best ball until we get our schedule. Then when we get the schedule, then we can do the real commentary draft guide of how to play for fantasy for 2024, including all the undervalued, overvalued things you need to trade for, which the last 2 days we've had reports on actionable things that dynasty GMs need to be doing right now to take advantage of some market situations that are favorable. So we're just going to be on a constant watch for opportunity. We're going to look at the schedule, but I'll continue to be scouting a lot of these undrafted free agents and lower drafted players to see. We have our rankings, and then I see what the teams did, and when I see some disparity on teams drafting a player way higher than what we had, if I respect the GM or if I see something to it, I go back and I check through and go, okay, why did this happen, or why don't I have this guy anywhere near where they have them, on like day 3 type picks and undrafted free agents if they start making noise in training camp. So I'll be scouting them just like there's still an NFL draft to go. So the NFL draft scouting did not end with the draft. It's ongoing.
And for our hardcore subscribers, RC, big thank you to them for watching this 2+ hours of video. And last week we live streamed 4 hours for day 1 and day 2 each. So that was 8 hours of live stream. RC, I don't know about you, but at the end of that, I was exhausted. Day 2, I don't know if the viewers picked up on it, but you guys sure did. I was coming on and off camera a lot because I caught a cold in between. So like live streaming and a regular day job, man, I don't know how these YouTubers do it where they just live stream for 8 hours straight. That is freaking tiring. These pre-recorded videos are all fine and well because we can do it at our own leisure. We can do some cuts or whatever, but when it's live and you're rolling for 4 hours, that is a hard deal, man.
We want to give them plenty of content, especially going into like a Friday at work where you're just trying to kill time. We're trying to give you plenty to listen to make your work day go by a little quicker.
Yep, and hopefully you guys get something out of that. We appreciate that. Thank you all for tuning in again. Watch for our AFC version of this video, which will drop sometime next week. Till then, check out RC's site, ffmetrics.com, and thank you all so much for your support.